Monongahela. Monongahela Rye. This is Nerd Day, and it's going to be all about Monongahela Rye and rye whiskey because Old Overholt is one of the original ryes and original Monongahela ryes. It's not anymore. But let's talk about the original Monongahela era. A lot of this I pulled just from my own reference notes from an article written by Sam Komlenick, Komlenic, who wrote a whiskey called What is Old Monongahela Rye in the Whiskey Advocate in 2018. I'll link to it below this video. But for reference, the Monongahela River winds its way through from West Virginia into Pennsylvania. And that region, in the early days of American settlers in North America, was the Wild West. I know now it's sort of hard, you got Tombstone and Texas and New Mexico, but at the time, Pennsylvania was the Wild West. It was the frontier. I mean, most of the battles that the Army fought post-Revolution were with Native Americans in Pennsylvania, not down in Texas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico, right? And in Virginia and up in Canada, actually, right? But this is also the front edge of early pioneer settlers and farmers farming. And if you remember, two things. One, whiskey is the product of agriculture, right? Just like in France, brandy is the product of agriculture of grapes and wine. It's an agricultural product. It's first. Then it becomes a commercial product when you can afford to scale up and do things like that. But originally you have farmers, they make grain, they sell grain, they store some grain, and then they distill grain, and they can sometimes sell the barrels of whiskey or, drink it or trade it. And in the early days, rye predates bourbon or corn as a primary grain in American whiskey. A lot of the settlers, German and Eastern European immigrants came in and they brought their rye grain with them because that's what they knew. And then they partnered those with distillation techniques that they each had learned, and you get the early American whiskey, which is rye, and it's stored in barrels. And as it gets a little older, it's called that Old Monongahela. It really gets a huge boost into the consciousness because of the whiskey riot that happens around Pittsburgh just after the revolution is over. That's a whole other story I will tell at some point. The Whiskey Rebellion. It's a great story. There's books written about it. And anyway, it's the first time that Washington calls up troops against our own citizens. It goes down without anyone dying. Well, in Pittsburgh anyway. Before that, some people died. A lot of people were tarred and feathered. But it put American whiskey on the forefront of the map as rye whiskey. And that's sort of, unless you went down into Kentucky or you came to New Orleans, where because of shipping and shipping lanes using the river and heading to New Orleans, everyone down there dominantly drinking bourbon or corn whiskey, right? But remember, the vast majority of the American population at this time is in New England and west of New England. So at the time, Monongahela Rye was almost only rye and barley. That's it. And still to this day, if you find distillers who are trying to create a true Monongahela Rye, you will find that there's no corn in the mash bill at all. And also, the other thing that you'll find in the early 1800s, as column distillation takes over Scotland and Ireland, and it starts changing North American whiskey. And what happens in the Northeast is this new contraption that shows up. It's called the 3-chamber still. And man, this is so nerdy, but I'm going to explain it to you. But it's so nerdy. It became the dominant way to make whiskey in the region for a long time, and then it collapses completely during Prohibition and does not come back at all until Todd Leopold in Colorado commissions Vendome to make him a 3-chamber still and starts making rye again in Colorado using a 3-chamber still. But first, let's talk about Old Overholt. This name goes way back into the early days of whiskey in America. It's bought, sold, bought, sold. Abraham Overholt is the family name. They've done a full rebrand on this. This is the bottled in bond. And, oh man, I just keep getting like Dr. Pepper and syrup. For some reason, my brain just keeps saying Dr. Pepper. And then spicy cinnamon syrup. It's eventually bought out and moved to Kentucky and from Pennsylvania, where it's still made now. Now it doesn't taste like what anybody would call Monongahela Rye. It tastes like what Kentucky thinks rye should taste like. And there's corn in the mash bill on this whiskey. So, I mean, as a matter of fact, it's like 39% corn. And the original Monongahela Rye did not have any of that. Now, I think, if I read correctly, they have a new fancy re-release called A Overholt. And I think that's a reroute back into just rye and barley, but we'll review that at a different time. So then this is very simple. I like that it's 100 proof because it's got a little bit more weight to it. It's a little bit more dense. Almost would call it syrupy. There's still a sort of flat metallic note in the background. Like, again, sharp sugars. But there's also a weird sort of density of syrup and cinnamon and pastry and bread. Oh, hey, it's got a decent mouthfeel. It's almost only mid-palate. The front end is a little light, then it flushes out, and then the finish is just a little bit dry and botanical, not really. But it's got a nice mid-palate richness, and it's just like, oh, yeah, I mean, that's a solid Kentucky-style rye. Again, remember, I don't really prefer rye very much. And so this is not going to be my, like, oh, I love it, it's beautiful. The ryes that I like tend to end up being ones that rye drinkers don't like. Like, this isn't rye, and I'm like, I love it. Yeah, I'm not getting much more than that. I'm going to add a little bit of water to this, and I'm going to tell you about a 3-chamber still. So, a 3-chamber still is weird. It looks like a column still, a really fat column still that's really stubby and short at the same time. But it functions more like 3 pot stills, but it also does trade evaporate through the chambers, which is what a column still does. And so it's this really bizarre hybrid that's probably more column than pot, but you make cuts like a pot still. And it took a whole lot of nerd conversations from my friends, from Todd trying to explain it to me. Todd sent me a book on it. My friend Reed Huddleston, who's one of my favorite whiskey people, he has spent hours trying to help me wrap my head around it. He understands it completely, because of course he does. And then Still Dragon, my friends at Still Dragon who are building them, or were talking me through schematics on them. And still, what I'm about to tell you is a super, like, 3-chamber still for dummies level of explanation. So forgive where my analogies fall off a cliff at any point. I've never run one of these. I feel like really to wrap my brain around it, I would need to run one, but I'm thinking I'm getting there. So you have effectively a column chamber type container with 3 chambers to it, right? You feed beer or wash, right, which is like 8 to 10 to 12%, ABV, into the top. Steam goes through all 3. Steam is put through all 3 chambers, and you fill all 3 chambers. Now, the first time you fill these things, it goes a little bit differently, but the point of this is to have a permanent looping cycle. And what happens is the first beer comes into the top, steam moves through chambers 3 and 2 and 1 and strips through all 3 as it goes, and then you make cuts off of the top, I'm going to call it the number 1 chamber. You make cuts off the top chamber, heads, hearts, tails, just like you would a pot still, only it happens really, really fast. Like 20 minutes is all you get. Like 20 minutes, man, to like make all your cuts. It moves really quickly. And then once you hit tails, you pause, you dump the third one, which is as stripped out as you can get it, and then you take the second one, put it into the third one, take what was in the first chamber, move it into the second chamber, put in new wash and add some faints back into the top chamber, and you do it again, and you make your cuts. And you just keep cycling everything and putting in new wash and a little bit of faints and running it through all 3 chambers until it comes out the bottom as stillage. So every time you add, it gets run once, then twice, then a third time, right? And each time it raises the proof, and the steam carries that through both chambers, and then you make your cuts at the top. What it means is that you get a lot of these like really low, heavy, oily compounds still showing up in the hearts that normally would be only showing up way down in the tails. It just bleeds through the whole cuts. But you don't get that sort of wet dog, funky, fainty ending thing. And so you end up with this new make that's like super oily and soft and almost creamy mouthfeel because of all these heavy oil compounds, but you don't get any of the fainty dog, wet cardboard paper sort of ending tails notes and the faints. And then that goes into barrels and creates this just deep, rich whiskey as it ages. And you can try it from the, Leopold is releasing their 3-chamber rye, and then now it's getting real age statements into it. And it's unlike any rye you've ever had in your life. Monongahela Rye, during the heyday of Monongahela Rye, was mostly made in stills like that, or in pot stills. These days what you're getting is column distillation, maybe with a doubler, or maybe just column distillation ryes. That's what you're getting from MGP, and that's what you're getting from a lot of these Kentucky distilleries. And it's lighter, it's thinner, it's a little more shiny and brittle, a little softer. These 3-chamber still Monongahela Ryes are no joke. If you want... Oh, and here's another crazy thing that I did not know until I read Sam's article. I'd never seen this written down anywhere, so I'm curious as to where he got it. But he said, at the time, if you read the notes, the storage of barrel houses in New England or in the west of Pennsylvania was temperature controlled. And so in the summer, it doesn't get too hot like it does in Texas, like 115, 110 degrees. It gets more of a reasonable 80s, 90s, right? In the winter, when it gets legitimately cold up there in Pennsylvania, they would steam heat their warehouses and keep the temperature pretty well leveled out at like 60, 70 Fahrenheit. So this is the early days of temperature-controlled barrel houses. That's totally unique in the flavor profile it's going to create. That's just, I think, really incredible. And I think Todd might be doing something kind of similar. I don't know that he's full temperature control, but pretty even, right? That is awesome and very unique. I think the closest you're going to get to trying Monongahela Rye right now is, ironically, probably Leopold Brothers in Colorado, or Wiggle does a good one that I think is pretty hefty and pretty character forward. And come on, Dad's Hat. Dad's Hat does a great one. There are probably more, and I'm missing them. And if you know of anybody doing what you would consider to be Monongahela Rye, please put it in the comments so we can all go try it. But I think that's really exciting. And hopefully that was as interesting to you as it was to me. With a little bit of water, spearmint jumps out on this. And it has no palate anymore at all. Cheers to you. I'm really glad you're here.